This video is a simple guide on how to build a sheath like this one right here. So today we're going to be building a sheath for this LMAX knife that'll be an angled offhand sheath. So the first thing I've done is I've taken a piece of paper and I've drawn out a couple of belt loop holes for how far apart I want them. And then I'll decide what angle I want the knife to sit at. I want it to sit at a fairly low angle. And now that I have it as low as it can go, or as low as I want it to go, I will use the pencil to measure out the size of the belt loop holes to know how wide I will need each hole to be. Now that I have those few things determined, I will now draw out the rough shape of the back pad of leather. It will need to be big enough that it gives some space around each of the belt loops and also protects the knife from rubbing against my body too much, and also just creates the general shape that I'll need this back piece of leather to be. Now that the general shape is drawn out, I am going to just make sure that there's enough space around the blade so that the welt will fit in. And now we'll move on to drawing the top piece of leather. I've drawn lines out around the blade to make sure that there'll be enough room for the welt to fit underneath the top piece and the bottom piece of leather. Now I will use an X-Acto knife to cut out the shape of the bottom piece of leather. Now that I have the bottom piece of leather cut out, I will now take it and lay it down on this piece of old saddle scabbard that I picked up real cheap somewhere, and this is just a fun project more than anything. So it's not the best leather, it's decent though. I have now traced out the exact size that I want for this, and I will cut it out. Now that it is cut out and also the belt loops are cut out as well, I now have my back piece of leather completed. The top piece here and this tongue that keeps turning down, I'm trying to figure out if I want to cut that off or not. But now that I've gotten that taken care of, I'm going to go back to the piece of paper and I am going to use my X-Acto knife and cut along these lines here so that I have the top piece of leather cut out and ready to go. But first we have to make sure that it is the right size. After I've cut it off there, and it looks like I did a good job. Looks like everything's lining up. It's important to measure twice and cut once, or measure even more than twice. Now I've got the outline traced onto this piece of leather, and I will cut. Now that it has been cut out, I go ahead and double check one more time, just to make sure everything is the way I want it to be. And I have the right side of leather going the right way on both pieces, so I can have the appearance I want it to have. Now we're going to go ahead and line it up. Everything looks about where I want it to be, but I can already see that there's something that's bugging me, and I'm going to go ahead and grab the X-Acto knife and make a change to my design. I've decided to cut off that top lip so that it has a little more consistent appearance to it. Also, I didn't think the knife would slide in and out very smoothly with the way it was set up there, so I'm just going to make that little alteration. And with that being said, we are now good to move on to the next step. We are going to lay out the knife on top of these pieces of leather just to make sure everything is right. And I'm going to begin tracing out the shape for the welt on the piece of leather itself. Now that I got it traced out, I can double check just to make sure that everything is the way I want it to be, and it looks pretty good. I've made enough space behind the blade for the welt to sit comfortably and provide lots of protection in the back so the blade isn't going to use the tip to cut up the back of the sheath. And I've set up enough room for the welt in the front as well, making sure that everything still lines up, including with the top of the sheath here so that the shoulders of the welt line up closely with the front piece. Everything is good to go. This line right here indicates where the bottom of the blade face will be and lets me know where I'll need to make the welt thicker if I decide to double layer the welt to have a more comfortable carry. Don't know if I'm going to do that or not, but at least I have the option at this point. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the front piece of leather to cut out the shape of what the welt will generally be. I'm going to use this really thick piece of 15-ounce scrap leather that I have laying around, and I'm going to start making the cuts, and the cut will just basically be the same as the front piece of leather. Now that I've gotten that front piece cut off, I will lay out my knife on top of it and trace out the shape of the blade so that I can make my cut, and there is the welt in one solid piece. Now that I have my 3 main pieces cut up, I will now take a little bit of contact cement. This stuff is pretty affordable and can be found at most hardware stores, and it actually does a decent job. The Weldwood contact cement has proven to be really good for me, even if the fumes are a tad bit strong. Just make sure you have a good airflow when you decide to use it. Now, I used to use this stuff incorrectly, and now that I know how to use it better with time and actual reading, I just put a thick layer, well, not a thick layer, I would say actually a thin layer of the contact cement on the back piece of leather right here, all the way around, and on the top piece of leather. Now, I don't worry about putting excess on, because whatever excess I need to remove, I can just rub off with my thumb. Now I'm just going to make sure that it's dry. It's a little bit gummy up here at the top, so that's not quite as dry as I want it to be yet. You want this stuff to dry out pretty well, which can take up to 15 minutes and even longer, but you want it to be dry so that when you put it together, it actually goes together really smoothly. If you put it together before it's dry, it can very easily come apart and take much longer to seal and settle. Now that both pieces are dry, I'm going to go ahead and take them, and to put these together after they've been contact cemented and dried, you just press them and they hold together pretty firmly. Now I'm going to double check using the knife itself to make sure everything is lined up the way it should be. Now I've contact cemented the top side of the welt and the top piece of leather on the inside, and everything is lined up how it should be. The top piece is nice and wetted up with that contact cement. The bottom piece is nice and wetted up. Everything looks about right, and I'm pretty sure that I can get away without double layering the welt where the blade ends. All right, now that we've got the whole thing contact cemented together, I can make any last minute decisions right now before the whole thing is going to be stitched together that still won't be too hard to undo, but at this point I'm pretty secure. The excess pieces of leather around the body can be cut off now or after the stitching. So here we're going to go over to my Tandy Pro Cowboy Outlaw sewing machine, and this thing has saved my fingertips over and over and over again because sewing by hand has been miserable, but this machine works phenomenally. I'll go ahead and stitch around the body of the sheath, and the contact cement is all pretty hard at this point. Everything's attached, and so it will feed through the machine pretty easily. It's not going to give me too many headaches. If I didn't have the sewing machine, what I would do at this point is I'd take this sheath to a drill press, or just grab a drill, throw a 1/8 inch drill bit on it, and drill out all my holes, and then stitch through them with a needle. And by drilling out the leather with a drill press and then stitching through it with a needle, you can actually do some really good at-home stitching without burdening your hands too much. Now that the whole thing is stitched together with some excess string hanging off, it is pretty much ready to go at this point. If I wanted to just stop right here, I could throw it on. However, though, I do want to make sure that things are a little bit more tidied up, so I'm still debating on cutting off this piece of leather that's sticking off at the top. I did wind up cutting it off in the end, and now the whole thing is stitched together, and I've used a lighter to burn off the threads. Up here in the back, I actually doubled the stitches around in a little square because the thickness of the handle was pushing the leather away a little harder than I wanted it to, so I added stitches to have a little more security. But the project at this point is done. Now for a quick little look on how it sits on a belt. The project came out pretty darn well, didn't take me too long to make it, and it holds the knife in very securely. I can see some things I would like to change about this project in the future. This was just a quick and dirty build meant to demonstrate something that you could do pretty easily on your own. And if this was something I was building to sell, I would have burnished all the edges before I sewed everything together. But where this is just a scrapper build, I'm just going to probably leave it like this. Maybe later on I'll change it, maybe not.